Adult Protective Services. In her role, she trains new and ongoing investigators on APS policy and practice and educates community partners on identifying abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable adults across the state. Megan is currently pursuing a master's in gerontology with an emphasis on community-based leadership services. Welcome, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I am loud, but just to make sure everybody in the back can hear me, we're good? Awesome. Okay. I always just like to make sure. And if I ever do drop my mic, just let me know because I do wander and I talk with my hands. So it's always just helpful. So yes, my name is Megan Schmidt. I am with Adult Protective Services. We are part of the Utah Department of Health and Human Services. Just a quick little backstory if you don't know. About 4 years ago now, the Department of Health and the Department of Human Services merged. And so we became one agency, one entity, with the goal of kind of collaboration, teamwork, sharing information. And so we have new colors, all the fun stuff. So we are going to be talking about vulnerable adult abuse and mandatory reporting for vulnerable adults. I can talk a lot. You guys will realize that very quickly. I could spend the rest of the afternoon chatting with everybody. If you do have questions, please do raise your hand, shout it out, different things. I love discussion-based presentations versus just lecturing. So if you do have questions, let me know. So what the plan is to cover, we're going to describe the role of Adult Protective Services. You will hear me say Adult Protective Services instead of APS. And the main reason why is in the community, APS and AP&P sound really similar and familiar. And if you have any law enforcement criminal history background, AP&P is adult probation and parole. And so there is a conception out there that if APS is coming to your home, we are there for a warrant or a urine screen or to do a search of the home or something like that. So if you can use Adult Protective Services when you're talking about our agency or talking about service, referral, anything like that to community members, it really helps kind of break down that barrier, and it helps them know that we're not there under a criminal capacity. We serve as an administrative agency, so we have no criminal involvement at all. So it just helps with that part. We're going to kind of define abuse, neglect, and exploitation, talk about some warning signs that are good to keep an eye out for. We will focus a lot on support and advocacy for our vulnerable adults, and then also talk about steps to take if you do have a concern. So this is my favorite stat. It would be my favorite stat even if I wasn't in grad school for gerontology, but it's just, I think, speaks to what things are going to come within our aging population. So for the first time in US history, older adults are projected to outnumber children by 2034. So I get asked a lot, why does that matter? Why is that important? The biggest thing to know is it's never happened before. The 2030s are going to be an extremely transformative decade for our aging population and our US population. So we are, and now officially, we have more adults over the age of 65 than youth under the age of 5 in the US already. But it's gonna kind of project and move towards youth under the age of 18. So in regards to our services, we are gonna see a lot more reports. For you as drivers, community members, advocates, you are going to be serving a larger population as well. And the big part that also ties into this is, what do you think is the one thing that our older adults are wanting more than anything as they age? You can just shout it out if you have an idea. Independence, yeah. People want to age at home. And so in order for them to do that, we need to make sure that we've got the services, resources, all of the things necessary to help them with that. And so that's greatly going to tie into as our population is aging as well. So just quickly for our Adult Protective Services, we are part of the Division of Aging and Adult Services. The only thing you need to take away from this slide is that offering choices for independence. And why that's important to know is that our goal within our agency is to help individuals age in place or age in the environment that they want, which is awesome for us on our side because we're service oriented and we want to make sure that our populations we're serving are being respected with their self-determination. It doesn't always match up with what community members, family members, law enforcement feel like is best for that person. We do sometimes get calls, and I will not judge you if you've had this feeling. Adult Protective Services doesn't do anything. I called them, I asked them to do these things. They're not putting all these things into place. They're not taking this person out of their home. They're not doing all of these things. But a big reason why is because we're offering choices for independence. And we want to make sure that we are respecting that self-determination for those that we're serving. So on the kind of surface level, it may not look like we're doing a lot, but we're working with adults and they maybe declined the services that were being offered to them. And then looking at our role. So Adult Protective Services, we are the state agency that has the responsibility and authority to investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation for vulnerable adults. Does anybody want to shout out a guess of point I get somebody's face kind of scrunched up a little bit, or somebody like elbows somebody saying like, oh, you didn't know you're a vulnerable adult, did you? And it's the big thing to know with that is a lot of our older adults that are considered vulnerable are working, they're living independently, they're caring for another family member, but age itself is a consideration that we make when we look at vulnerability. The second one kind of encompasses the other things that were brought up. So a dependent adult. That's somebody that's age 18 or older that has a mental or physical impairment that substantially impacts their ability to care for themselves. The big thing to know with our dependent adults, there's no diagnosis, condition, disorder that automatically makes somebody vulnerable. We will get calls that will say, my neighbor that has Down syndrome or my nephew that has MS, they have to be vulnerable because of that diagnosis. And in reality, what we're looking at, if they're under the age of 65, we need to show that there needs to be an impairment in this person's functioning. And it has to be a substantial impairment. So for our dependent adults, and if you would make a call to our agency to make a report, our intake team is going to ask you, what's the substantial impairment? The diagnosis is important to know, but we need to know how that person is impaired. So it's not just that they're struggling maybe with their activities of daily living. If you know that they are struggling with it because of a chronic health condition that prevents them from lifting their arms over their head to be able to wash their hair properly, that's something that's important for us to know. Or we get a lot where they'll say, well, they're not showering anymore. Is it because they're choosing not to? Do they not maybe remember due to a cognitive impairment? Or is it because they have to step over the shower and they're a fall risk and they're no longer able to do that safely? So those are the things that are really helpful to know specifically what is impairing that person. The other piece that's important to know, they only need to meet one of these categories of vulnerability. We do have individuals that we serve that all 6 of them, there's impairments, but for some it's just one. And then one of the other pieces, as we are now shifting into an aging nation, it's important to know the idea of a mild cognitive impairment. Is that a term that's kind of familiar that individuals, we usually are thinking about maybe the farther end of the spectrum where it's like advanced dementia, advancing Alzheimer's. But the mild cognitive impairment is really important to know because they're going to present as everything is okay. They're able to get themselves dressed, they're able to make and schedule their appointments, they even go to the bank, they deposit checks, do all of those things. But what's important to know here is that it's estimated up to 20% of adults that are 65 or older have a mild cognitive impairment. You can't tell just by looking at them. Where you really start to see it is with financial decision making, or making financial decisions as it benefits their health literacy and different things like that. That's where we really start to notice. So we will have individuals from like bank tellers that will call and say, we see Sarah every week, she deposits her checks or she does the same kind of banking each time. She's able to tell us these things, but as we're starting to look at her accounts, there's just things that are not really matching up. So presentation-wise, she looks like she's doing really well, but once we start to look at kind of that functional impairments as it relates to finances is where they're like, oh, that's weird, they're doing the same payment over and over again. Or they used to be able to pay all of their bills on time and now they're all going delinquent. And so it's kind of those surface level things that we don't always think about. This just really quickly, we'll talk about what our agency can and cannot do. The reason why this is important is there is a misconception out there that we are child protective services for adults. And you can call us and we will take your loved one who is refusing to go to a care center and we will help them move into that care center. And we'll do all of these things. We do get a lot of those calls. They'll say, our grandmother has started wandering, she left the stove on, we had a family meeting, she refuses to move to a care center, so can you come and move her in? And one of the biggest considerations within that is the idea of the decision making for that person and the rights that we're taking away if we would take those actions. So we kind of will jokingly within our teams, when we have those family members that are calling and they're always with those good natures, like we're really concerned about our loved one, we're worried that something's gonna happen, but we kind of have to laugh a little bit and wonder at what point is this person ready for their rights to be taken away from them? And so we'll kind of that idea of, well, when you turn 80, are you ready to move to a care center? And most of the families like, no, I'm gonna live in my home forever. But then it's kind of that disconnect between that loved one that they've got. So we will do protective needs assessments where we're determining the risk, we're looking at the allegations specific to that individual. We are gonna coordinate, which I think is our most important piece, coordinating with community-based services because we are a short-term agency. We are generally in there for about 45 to 60 days, so we're not following cases long-term. So we're really dependent on those community-based services. And then also we can do those short-term limited services through our care coordination program. But what's important to know is on the other side of what we can't do. We can't enter into an adult's home without their consent. We also can't remain in there without their consent. So we do get calls from time to time and they'll say, we made a report last week, we've been out, we've seen, I'll just use Sarah again, we've seen Sarah a couple times, she hasn't said anything about adult protective services. A big factor is we probably haven't gained consent to enter into the home. So that is, that can be a barrier, and so letting, if that's possible to help reduce that, that can help a lot. We also don't take custody of adults, we don't place them in nursing homes, even though we do get asked a lot for us to do that. Even law enforcement will get calls and they're like, we've got a lot of concerns, can you just help move this person into a nursing home? And then one of the other pieces is that we don't provide any services without voluntary consent, because we are working with adults that do have the right to say no. The last one is investigate if a victim is deceased. We do have situations where calls will come in after the person has passed away. If we do have a reason to believe that it could be related to an allegation, then we will open those cases up. So it's just something to keep in mind. So we've talked about this a couple times. The one big thing is I kind of keep going back to that self-determination piece, which is important to know with those that we're serving, that a vulnerable adult that has the capacity to consent has the right to self-determination. So they do have the right to make decisions that don't appear to be in their best interest. So I have a lot of people that will ask, well, what kind of decisions are those? Like, what does that actually look like? And the easiest one that I can make is, so I live in northern Utah. Where I live, our house is about a third of a mile away from my kids' elementary school. So when we get in the car in the morning, my kids are buckled in, and I get in the car, and some days I don't buckle my seatbelt. So I am driving down the street, our speed limit is 25, so I may be driving 20 because there's kids biking everywhere. I am making that active decision to not buckle my seatbelt. I have the dinging happening, all of those things. That's kind of the most basic comparison that I can show, that I do have the right to make decisions that don't appear to be in my best interest. I know the consequences and things like that can happen, but because I'm an adult that has the capacity to consent, I have the right to make that decision. So it's kind of a basic comparison, but it helps kind of hit home what that looks like. Oops, nope, that was just me, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. So looking at our allegation types, we won't go through all of these. We would be together for the entire day if we touched on all of them. But our code down at the bottom, you can search 26B-6-201 and it'll show you all of our basically statute definitions that we have for adult protective services. But what's important to know is with our abuse, because that happens a lot. Like, what does abuse look like? So we have to be able to show and demonstrate that it was knowingly, intentionally, or recklessly, that's a new part to our definition, that it was attempting to cause harm, causing harm, or placing another in fear of imminent harm. So when we look at emotional abuse or physical abuse, those are the things that we're trying to demonstrate. Does this, who we would consider an alleged perpetrator, do they have an understanding, did they knowingly or intentionally take this action? And the one thing that I really want to touch on is, very quickly, is emotional abuse. That is one of our most challenging allegations to investigate, because oftentimes it's what people like to think of like a he said, she said situation. So I oftentimes will use the consideration for myself of if I would get into a disagreement or an argument with my spouse, if we would come back later on and kind of debrief, would we both have the same understanding of what was talked about? There are times that we'll come back and talk about things and it's like we were two different people arguing in two different rooms because we both walked away with a completely different understanding of what happened in that situation. For our emotional abuse, the big part that's important to know is that knowingly or intentional verbal or nonverbal conduct that's directed at a vulnerable adult. The change that happened this year is that it would cause a reasonable individual. So if you are generally who would be considered a reasonable individual, if you feel like you would suffer mental anguish, emotional distress, fear, humiliation from a situation that you're either observing or that you're present when that's happening, that likely is emotional abuse that's happening to a vulnerable adult. So we get that question a lot, but what does that actually look like? So how would you feel if you had somebody screaming at you and calling you names and saying all of those hurtful things? Do you feel like that you would be impacted and would you be fearful? Would you be humiliated by that happening? If you can say yes to that, that likely is emotional abuse that's happening to that vulnerable person. So just some warning signs or kind of things to pay attention to as it relates to emotional abuse. One of the biggest ones is unexplained or uncharacteristic changes in behavior. If you are serving as the driver or interacting with or spending time with somebody who's generally pretty bubbly and their personality is generally pretty light, but lately you've been noticing just changes. And it's either you see them interacting with somebody prior to them getting picked up, or you see interactions while they're spending time with somebody else, that could be an indication that there's something going on. The other part that we will see is very subtle changes that will happen to vulnerable individuals, especially if there is a cognitive impairment or a communication deficit, to where they're maybe not verbally saying that something's happening, but you just see a change. Maybe their shoulders are a little bit slumped, or when they see that person, their eyes go to the ground and they no longer maintain eye contact. Just those changes. When I meet with caregivers and we talk about what kind of neglect and abuse look like, I let them know that even with a caregiving relationship that could be under some strain, because caregiving is one of the most challenging things that we will ever do, to know that if a caregiver would walk into the room, generally maybe that person receiving care will smile, maybe they'll look at them, maybe say something. Sometimes there's no recognition at all because they've seen them 60 times already that day. But when if you're ever observing it or seeing it and that person all of a sudden is looking to the ground or their shoulders or something, we've even had cases to where the caregiver comes to approach the person and they shudder and move away from them. Those are kind of the red flags to know that there may be something that's going on, that we just kind of need to pay a little bit closer attention to. So as we look at neglect, this gets asked a lot, what does neglect look like? The biggest thing to know within our definition is failure to provide the necessary level of care for an individual. We do have different areas that we're looking at, but nobody's level of care is the same, regardless of their diagnosis, their needs, different things. Everybody's care looks a little bit differently for them, and so we do look at it as an individual kind of case-by-case situation. One of the ones that's important to know about is a pattern of kind of conduct by a caregiver. So maybe there's situations that somebody's just having a really bad day and it's just something that happened once versus this is repeated things that I'm noticing each time. Say this person helps their spouse or their family member get ready to then utilize transit, and each time that you see them, there's just little things that are kind of building up and you're noticing maybe this just doesn't look right. It likely could be that pattern of conduct by that caregiver. And for some, especially for our vulnerable adults and those older adults that are in the mid 80s and plus, they don't like to rock the boat. So they're very unlikely to disclose what's happening. And it's usually just, because so-and-so is stressed, or it's been a busy morning, or they're doing the best that they can. And the other piece that's important to know, especially as we look at neglect, majority of our perpetrators are adult children and spouses. And so it's somebody that they have a very close, sometimes intimate relationship with. And I can tell you for our older adults, the last thing they want to do is get their loved one into trouble. And so they will oftentimes go with substandard care. They will go without the things that they need because they don't want to get their son in trouble. We've had cases to where individuals are being left home even though they are unable to ambulate on their own, they're unable to provide the care that they need, but their son is their caregiver and they don't want their son to get legally in trouble again. or they don't want things or action to be taken against them, or family members. And so just know that the disclosure piece and what that looks like can be especially challenging when it is a family member that we're suspecting is involved. So just some signs of neglect that could be happening to an individual. One of the biggest ones that I think is important to pay attention to is the lack of the medical aids. So glasses, hearing aids, dentures, a walker, wheelchair, any of those things that could assist in this person being more independent in their day-to-day life. What we will oftentimes hear from caregivers is, well, they keep throwing their glasses away, or they keep losing their hearing aids, or we went out to lunch recently and they threw their dentures away, so we're not going to replace them because they're too expensive. And so that's oftentimes what's happening. We also want to make sure that they know if that person has the funds to be able to replace those dentures, it is that responsibility of that caregiver to make sure that that person has the things that they need. And then it's what additional steps can we take to maybe prevent the loss of those glasses again? Are there adaptive things that can be done, different steps like that we can take? But the concern is always there of why. Why are they refusing to replace it? They oftentimes will say that they don't have money. We'll find out that they do, but maybe it's because that caregiver wants to use those funds for something else other than that vulnerable person, which that kind of moves from our caretaker neglect into financial exploitation as well. So it could be kind of touching on a few different areas. So self-neglect. This is a big one. So think back over the last, whether you've been here for a couple days or several years, if you think back recently, has there ever been a person either when you're working or out in the community that you've seen and you're just like, that just doesn't look quite right. They're either not dressed appropriately for the weather, or maybe they don't look like they're able to care for themselves or kind of maintain their own needs. It's something that we generally see on a pretty frequent basis. And then when you're working with vulnerable populations, it just kind of becomes more and more prevalent in what you're seeing. The big thing to know with self-neglect is that it's a non-purposeful act. We will have people that will say, well, they're just refusing to shower, they're refusing to take care of their hygiene needs. I can tell you that very, very few of our vulnerable people that we're serving are actively making the decision not to do that. It's generally because there's a barrier that we just haven't identified or haven't been able to work around. Or there's instability in some way, or there's fear because they're choosing not to shower, but it's because they are afraid of the caregiver that's offering the shower to them. And so it's kind of those things to know that there's something in place that's preventing them from just actively choosing to not take care of themselves. But it's failure by a vulnerable adult to provide the necessary level of care to themselves. What's important to know in this is that it is failure to do so as a result of a mental or a physical impairment. So we will get the question a lot of like, my uncle has just always lived, his house has always been cluttered, he's always lived like that. And so that may itself be a lifestyle choice that person's making versus individuals who have generally been able to do those things for themselves most of the time, and now they're starting to struggle. And it could be because of an onset of a cognitive impairment or due to declining in their mental or medical health. So we're looking to see kind of that change in that pattern or behavior for that person. So warning signs are kind of what to pay attention to with self-neglect. If you are seeing individuals out in the community, you are kind of in a unique situation because we have some that will only see individuals in like a medical clinic, in the bank. For you, you likely could see that person from maybe outside of their home into having a communication, having conversation with that person. So it could put you as a driver in a unique position to be able to gain a little bit more because driving with somebody in the car is pretty low key. There's not a lot of, because you're not maintaining eye contact with them either, they're usually a little bit more relaxed. They do say that when individuals are in the car kind of side by side or like a front to back seat situation, they're more likely to open up, disclose what's happening because they don't have to be looking right at that person. So it's a little bit of a safer environment to say what's going on or talk about what's happening in the situation. But one of the biggest ones is if you see a change in their appearance, or what we see oftentimes is they're wearing the same clothes over and over, and each time you see them, it's a little bit more soiled, a little bit more dirty, or the person just appears a little bit more unkempt. And you know that they have access to the things that they need, but you also know that maybe they were recently diagnosed with dementia, or there's just a change in that person's functioning. Those are the kind of cues that we're oftentimes looking for. Then financial exploitation. This is unfortunately our number one, and it's our fastest growing allegation in Utah. So self-neglect is kind of right up there as well on a national level, but unfortunately in Utah there's a lot of money, especially for our older adults. And so this is illegal or improper use of a vulnerable adult's funds, property, credits, assets, any of those items for them. What's important to know here is that Adult Protective Services, we don't have a financial threshold. So law enforcement oftentimes has a threshold of loss or theft that has to happen for them to look at it. We will have cases where it's $100 or less, and then we also have cases where it's over $1 million that's being exploited from the person. So it could be anywhere in between. Some of our staff like to joke that they have investigated lost pieces of cheesecake in facilities, a can of Coke, all of those things. But when we look at the loss that's happening to that person, especially if they're residing in a care facility where they're receiving $45, a piece of cheesecake, that's a lot to that person, especially if they've been saving that money up or doing different things like that. The other piece that's important to know is individuals that are in a position of cognitive decline, if they have recently had loss in their life, so if they're going through the grieving process, or if they're just dependent on other people, it puts them at a very exponential rate of being exploited. And so those are the things that are important to look out for. And when we look at we'll talk about the signs and symptoms in a second of what we need to, but I do get asked a lot, like, why are older adults targets? And kind of the stat shows us that they're gonna follow the money. So our vulnerable adults, especially for our adults over the age of 50, they acquire and own 77% of the assets in the US. So it's a very desirable target for individuals. And when they are more reliant on other people for assistance with things, it just puts you've got age in there, and then if you've got a limitation, and then you've got acquirable assets, it just kind of stacks the vulnerability for that person, unfortunately. So just some warning signs. One of the biggest ones that we tell like family members, caregivers, individuals in the community is when we've got family, neighbors, friends that are just showing an unusual interest in the assets of a person. You don't have to raise your hands, but has anybody served as like a financial decision maker, a bill payer, something like that for an adult? So if you were doing it properly, you know that it kind of is like a full-time job, especially if that person receives Social Security benefits, because you have to make an accounting of all of that. So whenever we have family members that are jumping at the chance to be financial decision makers, I always wonder why. I am listed to be the executor for my parents for their trust and their will, and I am dreading it. Because there's 6 of us, and I know it's gonna be a lot of work to manage and make sure that the things are going where they need to. So whenever we have people that are jumping at that chance, I always think, why? Like, what's your motive? What's your reason why you would wanna serve in that position? Especially when we see powers of attorney and different legal documents being changed as the person's age, that's always a red flag as well. Especially if they've had somebody that's been in place for 20 years and now all of a sudden there's a change to it, it should just make you stop and wonder why. And if it is happening in your family, I apologize. Everybody tells us, they're like, we're never gonna fight over money. That's never what's gonna happen. You will fight with your siblings over money. If you haven't already done it, you will do it at some point, unfortunately. So leading into it, the family dynamics. This is one of the more challenging pieces to talk about, because we do have this belief that we are going to love our parents, we're gonna age well with them, we're gonna do all the things that we need to. But in reality, 1 in 20 older adults will be financially exploited in their lifetime by a family member. And the piece that's important to know with this is that's just what's being reported and disclosed to us. They say that we know of about 1 in every 24 cases of abuse and neglect in Utah, and about 1 in every 50 cases of financial exploitation in Utah. So that number, unfortunately, is probably a lot higher than that. But that's just what's being disclosed and reported to us. One of the biggest things, we do have those threats that will come in, that if you don't put me on the account, if you don't give this truck to me, if you don't sign this deed over to me, I'm gonna put you into a nursing home. Or if you don't do what I say, I'm not gonna let you see your grandkids anymore. And for our older adults, the number one thing they wanna do is they wanna age in place and they wanna age in their home, but they wanna age with their loved ones. And so if there's that risk that they're not gonna see their grandkids anymore, that's pretty powerful coercion that could happen for that vulnerable person. There's a lot of promises. We do see, unfortunately, and I am a former investigator. I investigated in Salt Lake and Davis County. We would see adult children that would say, Mom, you're alone now. We really want to make sure that you can age with your family. Come move in with us. We'll kind of like do some demo on the house, and we'll do the things that you need to be able to do that. So So we did have a case where it was an older adult who did use a wheelchair for ambulation. Her daughter said that she was going to remodel to make the house appropriate for the mom. When we got out to the house to do the investigation, there were stairs walking up to the front door, and then it was a split level house. So as soon as you went in, there were stairs going up and stairs going down. And so the concern was that she had moved in, but they had done nothing to make this house more adaptable for this person, but all the money was gone out of the account. And so when we pulled up, she's just like, well, Mom decided she didn't want us to remodel because that would have been a lot of work, but she likes spending time outside, so we re-landscaped. So we used the $40,000 to landscape the yard. And so with that, when we got in there, the mom was in the back bedroom upstairs in her wheelchair. And so then the question of, but if there'd be a fire, an emergency, how would she get out? And the mom said that they had made a decision that she would get out of her wheelchair, crawl to the stairs, and slide down. So in her mind, because she didn't want her daughter to get in trouble, that was how she had been told that things would happen if there would be an emergency. And so she also did not want to rock the boat. She was very hesitant to say anything was wrong because she was worried her daughter was going to get into trouble. Even though she said, yes, I did add her onto my account. She did say she was going to remodel. Then the landscaping showed up. And it was beautiful. It was those giant rocks, the trees, everything that you'd want to make your house look wonderful. But inside of the house, she was essentially in a prison and wasn't able to move and get around to the places that she needed to. So looking at some advocacy and support. So when we're looking at and talking about and working with our vulnerable populations, being able to offer the support to them and helping them feel empowered versus over-empowered is one of the most important things that we could do. Because we are in the helping profession, we're in these fields because we want to make things better for individuals, but we also want to make sure that we're recognizing self-determination for those that we're serving. So kind of using our person-centered language is really important. One of the biggest ones is allowing time for response and silence. When I train law enforcement, the biggest thing that I tell them with our vulnerable adults, sit back and get comfortable. This is not going to be a 20-minute conversation. They're not going to be able to just quickly write things down. You may be sitting there for a while waiting for them to form a response, feel comfortable disclosing, those different things. Also being aware of and how you offer kind of those accommodations for that person. Getting to know them a little bit more can really help, because even though we're trying to make things better, make things easier, help this person be more effective, we don't always know if we're overstepping in those situations. So it's better to offer too little at the first than offer too much and then try to kind of backpedal out of all of those things. And then one of the things that we see a lot is understanding the strengths of that person, but then also recognizing the limitations, but we're recognizing them in the sense of, is there things that I can do to help make it better for you? And so instead of just saying, I feel like you need to have this service, and if you moved in with this family member, things would be better, asking them how do they want to age? What does that look like? What could we do to make things easier? And being as strength-based as possible. So just if you want to take a screenshot of this, I'm also more than happy to share my slides. Just some contact information that's important to know. This is statewide that's available. Has anybody seen a silver alert recently? On like the banners and stuff. I was driving down here yesterday, there was one in Utah County that happened. So it was just the banner that said Silver Alert, Utah County. So if you don't know, it's similar to an Amber Alert for adults that are over the age of 60 with a cognitive impairment. So there's a concern that there's a vulnerable person out in the community that we need to help locate or be able to share information as quickly as possible. So if you do see a post for a Silver Alert, just know that there could be a vulnerable person in your community that does need action and does need assistance very quickly. So with the scams and frauds, this one is important to know about for a few reasons. One of the number one things is that Adult Protective Services, we don't investigate scams and frauds. And the reason why is they are happening at such a staggering rate. We stopped investigating them in 2019. Now currently we get dozens and dozens of reports every week of scams and frauds that are happening. So if we did investigate them, it would take all the time that essentially we would have to be able to do that. So if you do have the concern for an individual, you are welcome to call our agency. These are the numbers that we're going to share with you as the person calling, but then also that vulnerable person as well, so that they can be aware of what that looks like and to know The biggest piece of it is, unfortunately, most of our scams and frauds are happening internationally, and so we need organizations that do have the manpower, say like the Federal Trade Commission and the FBI and other organizations that do have jurisdiction in order to be able to investigate with the goal of pursuing towards prosecution. So, Area Agency on Aging, is that a new term for anybody? For a few? Okay, I see a couple head nods. So that is, when I say Area Agency on Aging, most people think Meals on Wheels. That's what they think about. They think Meals on Wheels in the senior centers. So that's a resounding response that I get when I ask people about what they know about aging services in their community. But it is so much more than that. They have in-home supports that are happening. We have caregiver support, which is my favorite program that they offer. And it helps in so many ways. It helps that person that's receiving care, but then also helps that unpaid caregiver, which is generally a family member as well, to be able to get the support and to reduce the burden on caregiving. Because it is something that gives us a lot of joy, but takes a lot of strain and a lot of pain in what's being provided as well. But just knowing, so if you go to our website, dost.utah.gov/locations, it will show you an interactive map of the area agencies on aging, or we lovingly call them the AAA. So I say that sometimes, but it's not the AAA that will come and change your tire and get you off the side of the road. So just a little disclaimer of what those two are. And then looking at our multidisciplinary teams. This is something you may never use, but it's good to know that it's there. So across the state, we have multidisciplinary teams, or MDTs, that meet once a month. They are connected with our Area Agency on Aging. So 5 County, they run the MDT down here. We have agency partners around the state that meet, and we staff cases, and we talk about situations. We recently had a case up in kind of Provo, what we call mountain land aging up there. Somebody was not able to afford their taxes on their home anymore, and they were worried about losing their home. They had lived there for 60 plus years. So the person that they were working with actually called the Area Agency on Aging, and we staffed the case to look at resources and services. So just know, if you would have concerns for somebody in the community, it could be somebody that you are serving as a driver for, but it could be a family member, anything like that. Know that you can call 5 County to find out, and they will likely bring the case to our MDT, and we'll staff it to bring resources, supports, whatever that needs to look like for that person. So I get asked a lot, kind of like, what are the benefits? One of the biggest ones is access to coordinated services. We find out through a lot of our staffings that there's multiple agencies that are already involved in that care for that person, and we can kind of consolidate the services and make sure. But the biggest thing is, for the person that we're serving, it helps them know what's available. It helps them know that the situation's being discussed, that their needs are being addressed, and that we can hopefully meet that need of helping them age at home. So one of the last couple resources is our dementia education. Has anybody ever attended either like a Dementia 101 or a Dementia Live or any kind of like an education series like that? Okay, so a couple people, which is awesome. But dementia.utah.gov has a lot of resources. They also have a lot of resources in dementia education that is connected with our area agencies on aging. But specifically for us as a state agency, there are resources that are provided to family members, caregivers, care facilities, team members, different things like that that could really help with that kind of goal of learning more about dementia, can help you care better for the person that you are caring for, but then also know kind of what to look out for and kind of how you can work. So this is probably the question that I get most often. What can I do to prevent this from happening? So you know the signs, you know what you're looking for, but then people ask, what can I do to prevent it? The biggest thing, so the 5 easiest things that we can do is we can listen to what's being reported to us, how things are being discussed. With drivers, the most unique opportunity that you could be in, if you serve as a regular driver for an individual, you may see them several times a week, once a month, whatever that looks like. But what will happen is we find there's what we like to call little like mini or micro disclosures that will happen. It'll maybe just be an off the cuff remark one time, and as you get to know the person, each time they tell you a little bit more about what's happening. So we've had that happen with people that are providing medical transportation, with physical therapists, hairdressers. Whenever I go to my dentist, he always asks like if there's something else that he should be looking out for, because there's a lot of disclosure that happens in those environments, but it's generally really small until enough like rapport and kind of everything is built up to be able to feel comfortable. So listening to what's being disclosed, educating yourself, which you're here, so you've kind of already tackled that piece of it, and then making reports. So we're going to talk about mandatory reporting next, but knowing what the signs are and then the necessary steps to make a report are really important. Building a community. So you being here at the conference, you kind of already tackled two of those things because you're building community right now and building those partnerships. And then also reaching out. There are a lot of resources that are out there. We oftentimes don't know where to look or how to gain access to them. So on the last slide, I have my contact information, but then also for our agency. It's a great way just to share and learn. And then I have a bunch of resources on kind of the front water table that are over there. They're just free to take if you feel like it could be useful, but it's great stuff to have with you. You can hand it out. Just know that it's there. So looking at mandatory reporting. Again, I won't make you raise your hand, but did everybody know that Utah's a mandatory reporting state? So we are a little bit unique in Utah. In a lot of states, there are service professionals that are mandatory reporters. So I'm from Minnesota. The longer I talk, you'll hear the long O's will start to come out a little bit. But there it's medical professionals, therapists, social workers, teachers, law enforcement. Those are the mandatory reporters for the state. Here in Utah, if you are a resident of Utah and you're over the age of 18, you're a mandatory reporter, regardless of your role, position, anything like that. So you are mandatory to report for yourself professionally when something's happening, but then out in the community as well, for a family member or different things. So any person who has a reason to believe that a vulnerable adult has been the subject of abuse, neglect, or exploitation shall immediately notify Adult Protective Services, our intake, or the nearest law enforcement agency. So it goes on to say that when the report is made initially to law enforcement, they will collaborate with our agency and they'll make a report because they're mandatory reporters as well. Just like within our agency, if we suspect a crime has happened, we are mandatory obligated to contact law enforcement to let them know that. The one thing I will say within this is if you would call law enforcement, we also really ask that you call us as well. And the reason why it's important is that if you would call law enforcement, you're generally speaking to somebody within dispatch. So dispatch will take the initial report, it'll get sent to whatever that patrol officer that's going out there, patrol will go out and see, and then they're generally writing a report and it's going to a detective. By the time it gets to the detective, it likely is on the fourth person that is either read or witnessed or disclosed as happening. They will then contact our agency. So by the time the investigator gets it, sometimes they're the seventh person. And so think of telephone, the game, how much information changes, which that could not have been a better time for that to happen. That was kind of perfect. So, but within that, it's kind of the idea of think of how much the story could change. We generally lose information, all of those things, so it's best if you can call us as well. Oh, okay, I've got a little bit more time. So, failure to report, this does come up as well. An individual is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor if they willfully fail to report suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So it's just an important part to know within our mandatory reporting clause. We take all reports within good faith. So we are not going into it assuming that it's retaliatory or that they're doing it just for a certain purpose. Our hope is that they're doing that in order to help protect that vulnerable person. So here is our reporting information. So to report, our intake team is there Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's when you can speak to somebody live. You may have to sit on hold for a little bit. We currently have 5 intake staff. And last month they processed over 1,600 referrals. So they're busy. There's a lot going on. And so they are taking live calls, but then they're also processing our web referrals when they're coming in as well. So just know that you might have to sit on hold. Sometimes it will go to a voicemail. Please leave a message. Our intake team will call you back. But if you're not able to get a hold of anybody, you do have the option to report online as well. And then it's all the same questions. So whether you call in or you go onto our website, you're going to be asked to provide the same information. So leading to that, what do you need to share with Adult Protective Services? As much as possible. That's the easiest caveat so that you don't have to remember of like Megan said to share this, and this, just share as much information as you've got. But what we would be really helpful to know is the vulnerable adult's name, their date of birth, how they're vulnerable. So are they over the age of 65? If they're under the age of 65, what are their impairments? What are their limitations? That's important to know. What I feel like is the most important thing that you can share is, where does the person spend their time during the day? We will oftentimes get reports and it's got their name, their date of birth, it's so beautifully written, it's got their address, but they don't put in there that that person goes to the senior center 4 days a week from 10 until 2, and every time our investigator goes out, nobody answers the door. But it's because she's at the senior center and we didn't know that. So knowing where they spend their time during the day is really important, and that's really helpful as well. And safety concerns for the investigator going out. If there are safety concerns, it does not prevent us from going out, but if we know about it, it helps us go out safer. In my role of an investigator, within like a couple weeks on the job, was bit by a dog because I didn't know that there was a dog and it was not chained up. So we entered into the home into the front yard, and the dog came from around the corner. The person that reported knew that there was an aggressive dog on the property, but they didn't want to disclose it because they thought we wouldn't go out. And so they were just hoping the dog was put away that day, but it wasn't. And it was really small. It's always the little dogs that are the ones that are, the big ones are the super excited, happy ones. It's always the little ones that get mad at us. So within what we consider an alleged perpetrator or an abuser, law enforcement calls them suspects, so they're just different names that are within there, but as much information about them as well. If they live with that vulnerable person, that's crucial for us to know, because it helps us bring another investigator out. Or if we know that, if say it's a spouse that's the alleged perpetrator, but they work from 9 until 3, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that's when our investigation team's gonna go out. They're gonna go out when we know that that perpetrator is out of the home. It just creates safety for everybody, and it creates a higher risk of disclosure for that individual. And then collateral information. I feel like our collaterals are the most important people, because they're oftentimes seeing something, witnessing something, overhearing something, and they're usually people that can provide pretty accurate information as well. So if there's family members, medical professionals, a neighbor that lives down the street, anybody that could aid in the investigation, please let us know. The other piece that's important to know is, if a collateral witnessed something, please encourage them to call. If they're letting you know about it, that's great. We would love to have 9 reports all confirming that same information, because 9 different people witnessed it, versus just one person saying that it was witnessed by 9 different people. And then if there are already photos, any documentation, it's different kind of for each role. The other piece to know is your information as a referent. We do get that question a lot of, can I report anonymously? So you do have the right, even if you call in. If you do make a web referral, it does require you to have an email address so that we could respond if necessary, but we get a lot of anonymous@anonymous.com. So that's just something that will happen. That's how people write their email addresses in there. I will say is, if you provide your information as the referent, it allows us to collaborate. And it allows us to kind of communicate, give updates. And also, if we are maybe having a hard time reaching the person, having that reference information is so helpful, because you might be able to provide us a little bit more about what's going on and where things are at. And then lastly, here is my information. Feel free to reach out. You can take a screenshot. We have people that will reach out right after the presentation, but every once in a while, like 6 months later, I'll get a call and say, you presented at this conference, can I ask you a question? I love that. Our reporting information is on the other side. The other piece that's really important to know is you can call to ask questions. It doesn't have to just be to make a report to our agency. We get calls all the time asking about resources, or what somebody should do, or what their options are, whatever that looks like. And then our intake team will listen. And sometimes they're like, well, actually, kind of from what you're telling me, it sounds like there may be abuse that's happening. And then they just start making a report while they're on the phone with you. So there are a lot of different options. We want the information out there. We want to kind of hit those different areas of how we can educate and work towards prevention. So that is everything that I have. Thank you very much for listening.